And others may join us while we're in process.
Excellent. Yeah, but let's start slowly and then see if the next couple of minutes people will slowly start to trickle in. So I am Maiken, and Maiken Piil, and I will co-host this webinar tonight with Dorianne, who has already introduced herself. So welcome to all of you who has joined so far, and I'm just going to see how my cursor, here it is. So just the basic housekeeping and the plan for tonight, so you know a little bit about what's going to happen. As soon as we get started, Dorianne and I will just make a short introduction to each one of us. Nothing to elaborate, but just for, you know, some of you know Dorianne. I know some of the people on this call know me, and so we thought it would be good to just introduce ourselves a little bit. And then we'll go into talk a little bit about what is the higher self, and why do we feel that this is important now, and why have we chosen to call this masterclass Lead from Higher Self. And I will talk about this first part, and then Dorianne, I will hand it over to Dorianne to talk a little bit more about the decision making itself. And then we will talk about the masterclass and what the content from each week, and what we are proposing and wanting to share with you today, and hoping you would like to join us. And then a little bit more about what we bring to the table, each one of us, a little bit more about our backgrounds and why we personally feel really called to do this masterclass. And then some practical stuff about registration and timings and things like that, and then questions and closing. And we will pause throughout for questions. And but if you have questions, if something comes up or something is not clear, or anything at all, really do not hesitate to just use the chat room. Me and Dorianne will both monitor the chat room throughout, and support each other wherever we are presenting to bring in these questions, and help answer any questions or anything that comes up throughout. So you can use the chat room for that. And as you all know already, we will be recording this webinar, and we will send it out to all of you who joined today, so you have it. But we will also be sending it out to everyone who actually registered for this class tonight and might not be able to make the time. They will still get the possibility to see this. So just to let you know that, and also that you can turn your video off or on, however you feel comfortable for the duration of this webinar. Or if you want to ask questions, you can just turn it back on, but feel free to also just turn off the cameras if you feel more comfortable with that. Yeah, and do we have any new?
Not yet, no.
Not yet, okay, excellent. Well, I think maybe we should just jump into it then. And I will just hand it over to Dorianne for now, just in the spirit of this masterclass and what we're going to talk about and share tonight. We wanted to start with a little centering exercise. So I will let Dorianne lead us and guide us through that.
So obviously practices for mindfulness and centering are important, and we will incorporate that into the masterclass practices as well. So we're going to start with the centering. It's going to be very brief, and it's just going to be a simple breathing process, which many of you have already used in the past. So I just invite you to sit in wherever you're sitting comfortably. And if you feel like closing your eyes, you can. You don't have to. Just to take a breath in, counting to 4. So I'll count with you. 1, 2, 3, 4, and hold it. 2, 3, 4, And breathe out. 2, 3, 4. And hold it out. 2, 3, 4. And now taking a deeper breath in. 2, 3, 4. And just feeling as you're holding it, how you're expanding your chest and the air that's within you. And now releasing it and feeling how you're relaxing and letting go as you release. And then we're going to take one more deep breath in for a count of 4. And hold it. And breathe out. And now breathing normally, just feeling completely present, completely centered and focused, and available to be present to each person who's at this meeting, this call, and present to the material that we are going to talk about today. And so I just invite you back, being present. Thank you very much for that moment of centering.
Thank you so much. That's nice to start this with a little grounding. Actually, Dorianne, why don't you just carry on and introducing yourself?
Okay, so for those of you, I think quite a few of you on the call do know my background, but for those who are going to be listening later, I have many years of experience as a leader, leading organizations, both large and small. And after about 20 years of doing that, I moved into becoming a coach, leadership development mentor, and teacher. I teach mindful leadership in the university setting as well as in a corporate setting. And I published including one on authentic leadership and a chapter in a book on a handbook of personal and organizational transformation. So transformation is one of my passions, helping the individual spirit to grow within each person and to become the best version of ourselves. So I'll stop there, just a brief introduction. And Maiken, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Yes, I will. So I have a kind of very diverse background as consulting with different agencies, communication, public affairs, and marketing in the first part of my career. And then for the past 7 years, I've specialized in conscious leadership. And that's both, and also that's how Maya Dorianne initially met, through being trained in spiritual intelligence and conscious leadership development frameworks. And then I do a lot of different teachings in both corporate and in private with spiritual and conscious development. So I have a kind of a variety of things I do in that field. For the very kind of very spiritual part, and also some more for the kind of more conscious leadership, corporate friendly. So those are the two aspects I'm bridging, also especially in this webinar we're introducing here. And kind of my deeper purpose of this is really to connect each individual with the innate inner power that we have in our spiritual nature, and the power just in our what we are able to create and be in this world, and how that trickles out to impact the rest of the world. That's kind of where my deeper desire is in the work I do through conscious leadership and spiritual intelligence and spiritual development in general. So yeah, that's kind of my quick introduction. And then I will take us through the first part, which is talk a little bit about higher self, and what we chosen to call this masterclass that we're offering, leading from higher self. And when we talk about having a higher self, it kind of poses the question: there must be then a lower self, since we're claiming that there is a higher self. Maybe not, the terminology might not be so the best to use, call lower self, but more maybe a limited self. And we see the higher self as our unlimited self. And there is two very distinct qualities in the way we operate in the world, and the way we lead, the way we create, the way we collaborate, when we come from our higher self, which is the unlimited self, and then the kind of the counterpart to that, the lower self, which is very limited in its way of being in the world. And most people today, and this is something that Dorianne will talk a little bit about later towards the end of this, most people today operate in very high degree from their limited self in everyday life, but especially also in business. And when we do that, and there are different names for the limited self, some can also just call it the self, the ego, the created identity, the personality, the false self. The terminology it's not so important here. What's important is distinguishing between these two parts of ourselves that we have chosen to call higher self and limited self. So whatever terminology that resonate with you is fine. It's more the kind of idea that we have these two parts of ourselves that we can choose to operate from, and that most people operate from that lower part or limited part of ourselves. And the purpose really of this seminar and this masterclass we're offering is to really shift from our limited self and limited mind into our higher mind, and that path in part is very unique and very personal, and in other parts actually follow a very predictable developmental path, which is what Dorianne will also come back to. But our higher self is really what we also know as inner wisdom, wiser self, the best version of ourselves, our soul, true self. It has many names. But it's really the most creative aspect of ourselves, where we have new ideas and solutions that we maybe didn't think of, where we constantly see new possibilities and opportunities. It's the part of ourselves which is very wise and open and creative and curious and courageous. And the two very different qualities, these two parts of ourselves, is that our unlimited self, higher self, can really navigate unpredictability very well, and it's very responsive. Whereas our limited self really likes predictability and is very reactive to the circumstances. And that when we operate from these two different parts of ourselves, we create completely different outcomes, and we experience things and experience life and experience decision making completely different within ourselves. So a limited self is in contrast, it only knows what's already been created and what's already happened. It operates based on past experiences and past learnings of what we've been taught is right and wrong. So it's these two parts of ourselves that we want to dive deeper into in the masterclass. And why we think this is important now is because the world in general is just really presenting us with a lot of complexity. And, you know, it doesn't really matter if we are in corporate settings or if we just, so to speak, you know, operating as, you know, I do as a solo entrepreneur, or you know, whatever we, just as a private individual in this world, we are increasingly faced with a lot of complexity in the way the world is today. Increased interconnectability, the information stream is just constantly coming at us. We just recently been confronted with I'm looking at the picture, and the words escape the fires in the Amazon. And we're pollution, and then for business in particular, you know, we're competing demands, a lot of different interests, a lot of complexity in how to find solutions that match these problems that we are facing today. And just also for a lot of people, just having like an everyday life where we can actually thrive in the midst of all of this, in the midst of like the responsibilities that we are asked to step up to, the demands that are put on us, and the relationships we have to navigate in. So it really doesn't matter, you know, where we are, but the world is becoming more and more complex, and no place less than business is really, you know, where we are really, a lot of people are really struggling with all this unpredictability. I don't know why this word is causing me problems today. Unpredictability. And we call this world VUCA world, you know, the volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous world that is that we are living in today. And our limited self really prefers the familiar over the unfamiliar. And so everything that's unfamiliar, everything that's new, everything that's unexpected, you know, everything that comes with no certainty, no patterns, no guarantees, is not something our limited self really likes very much, and especially in corporate settings. So this whole, you know, can we make the right decisions, and what decisions are the right ones to make? And even if we make the right decisions today, the world can shift tomorrow. So these VUCA conditions are really, more than anything, challenging our way of operating in the world. So it affects our inner balance and our outer balance. And I really need, when there's no congruency between our inner world and our outer world, with our inner capacities not matching the capacity or the demands that are being asked of us from an external world, it creates this internal turbulence that really our limited self is not liking very much, preferring the familiar, the predictable, the guaranteed outcomes. And it doesn't really know how to operate in these circumstances. It's very limited by past experiences. So only kind of going with, you know, what is already learned, how to deal with a situation, and really holding on to what is familiar because that feels safer. It really prefers guarantees that when I make a decision, I need to know that this is the guaranteed outcome of that decision, or that I know I will be safe, or I know this will happen. So it's really the part of us that's really trying to figure out the right thing to do, and trying to figure out the linear ways that we can kind of make a plan, follow the plan, and then the outcome will happen. Or that we make a decision, we know that, you know, certain things will happen at the end of that. And it's very in the kind of old days where we didn't have the complexity we have today, it was, you know, it was an operational way of being in the world. But now that we need to have this congruency between the inner world and the outer world, it's creating a lot more turbulence for us, because we have this attachment to right and wrong, and we can, when the limited self gets threatened by all of these circumstances or all these conditions we are in, it easily gets defensive and suspicion when triggered, and easily stressed out when it's operating this unfamiliar territory. And these are just some of the things, like if a picture to kind of envision this is that, and I'm sorry, I have to move the pictures just here. It's just covering for my slide here on my screen. So if you think about your limited self as it's kind of made up and composed of different realities that we have been exposed to as we grow up. So that means from we are born to all the way up until today, when we got into school, when we got our first job, the things we were taught by our parents, all of these things are different realities. So when we are, for instance, start a new job and our boss tells us this is how things are working here in this business, then we internalize that as a reality, as this is a way to be. So we get integrated, all these truths get integrated into our consciousness and start to determine the shape our lives begins to take. And, we can also call these belief systems, but we really want to just, open that up to any kind of reality that we create, whether those are beliefs or worldviews or other kinds of truths that we resonate with and that we have incorporated into our consciousness. So when all of these kind of identities and realities that we are integrated as our truths are being threatened in some way by unpredictability of change, by inner or outer change, it can be both, or when we are stressed, when we are pressed, our resources are low, maybe by too many demands on work or by too many demands on life, or things happen that we didn't foresee that puts extra pressure on ourselves. This is where our limited self feels threatened. So everything that we have worked and the identity we build up to deal with things, when our life match that, everything is fine. But as soon as anything comes in and threaten our reality, this is kind of our fearful self comes out, the fearful self of our limited self, what we also can call ego. And because of the nature of the ego, which is very concerned with belonging, fitting in, occupied with other people's perception, protects itself, is selfish, immature, defensive, suspicious, all of these things that a lot of us probably don't like to say about ourselves, but which exist in all of us and come out every now and again to protect ourselves every time we feel threatened. It can look something like this. So I think probably a lot of you know these voices within yourselves. I know it, all of them within mine. They all exist within me at certain time, and sometimes even, they can two of them can be present at the same time, having an argument about something I feel maybe other people have done wrong, or have wronged me in some ways, or things that are happening in my life that cause me to worry or to be alarmed or perceive a threat. So these are kind of our reactive, when our limited self get triggered, we have these reactive voices in ourselves that really only creates more disturbance for ourselves. So the way in the masterclass, we're going to dive a lot deeper into the nuances of limited self and ego voices, but it's really to just kind of paint this picture about we have a limited self, and it doesn't mean that necessarily that we are, under pressure or anything else, but as we are looking through the world, we are looking at the world through a filter which has already been kind of established, and in a way where in a world today where everything is moving fast, where everything is new, where nothing can be predicted, it's not really the best operating model, so to speak, for our leading and our being in the world. If we really want to thrive, create better relationships, be more creative and innovative, really know how to combine the long term with the short term, and have a lot of perspectives. We really want to be able to shift in and operate and lead from our higher self to a much higher degree. And I will talk about what that is in a moment. But the cost when we have ego in control is really that we play it safe. We don't offer our viewpoints, maybe because we are afraid what other people will think, or if we will not fit in. We really occupy with being right and looking good. So really, that people get attached to viewpoint, a position we don't want to change, because that means that we might be wrong if we, acknowledge that we didn't know the right solution, or, we really want to hold on to our viewpoint and don't consider other options because, that might make us look bad, or we want to be right. It can also look like playing the victim, where we blame others instead of take responsibility for our own actions. We withhold contribution. We might not say something in a meeting, or we might not share some information that we know could benefit other people, because we want to hold on and protect what's ours. Also, that we maybe go into or board in personal interpretations, that we make up negative stories about the situation or other people, which distort the whatever is going on. So there's a lot of these. There's a lot of costs, both in an organization and to our personal lives, when we operate from our limited self. So what we really want to do is meet our higher self and learn to shift into this part of ourself on a daily basis, so that we more and more often, first of all, start to recognize, these two different parts of ourselves. They can be very tricky, but also that we learn to then shift in times of decision making, times of stress, whenever we can feel the limited self is kind of running away with us, that we can shift into our higher self, which is wise, fearless, courageous, very compassionate, peaceful, joyful, connected to others and nature. It's very abundant. It doesn't have lack and fear of lack, but can operate from a very abundant mindset, that there is enough for everyone, and about sharing. And it's very good at thinking in the long term, and not just be occupied with what's serving me short term, but it can also combine the two, both think long term and short term. And it's really looking for win-win situations at all time, and very aware of how connected we are with each other and with nature, and how everything is interlinked. And this greater awareness makes us work for a better world in general, but serve a bigger purpose above, beyond ourselves and our own demands. So when we learn to tap into this place in ourselves on a regular basis, then we can really learn to trust that place for wisdom. Our limited self is very, very smart. It's very it's very smart in many ways. It can be very clever, but it's not wise as our higher selves. And we can learn to tap into that for making decisions, so that we bring a lot more ease to our decisions. We bring a lot better outcomes to everyone involved. And we spend less energy making decisions, quite literally. And also when we are stressed, gain perspective, discern these wise voices, and take current best actions and handle stressful situations. That's also really the part of us that's just calm everything down instantly. So it really helps us to be our best self and show up from the best, highest intentions and the best version of ourselves at all times. And it might sound a little bit idealized, but I can really say, just from having practiced this work myself for many years, and also from serving clients and working, teaching that to see the benefits and the change that happen when we start to bring more consciousness, not just of our fearful part, everyone knows as the ego, but also to the belief patterns that we operate from in general, that we have learned throughout so many years, that we learned right and wrong, and we're attaching these things, meaning to these things, and we look at everything through that filter, and the ability to really question our own thinking and see not just where we are fearful and we get into our ego, but also where we just limit our perspectives in general is really useful. And I have a lot of examples of this. I can just very quickly share 2 recent examples of my own, which were both collaboration projects. And one was on a web project where I was working with a web agency to build a website. And it transpired after a few meetings that we were not aligned at all. And the things that they created that came back were so misaligned to the purpose of the project and to what was needed for that project. And I personally had a moment of limited self panic, completely classic. I got really upset and felt like, they made these promises, they said they were on top of it, and like now they're coming back with this, excuse my language, shit. And it was not aligned at all. I had a lot of money at stake as well. So that caused to my fear of, losing money in this project, having wasted this work and, maybe not receiving what was needed for that project. And I called a friend and I spent about an hour complaining about this and like debating about what to do. And I was really upset and worried about it. And I even contacted someone who I knew could maybe, stand and take over the project instead. And I could feel this very limited self energy and the narrative, the stories that was engaged from that aspect of myself. And it felt really wrong. I could feel the experience was not right, even though it rationally, made sense. And my friend said to me, these things will never end, will never turn out good. When you're not on the same, wavelength, this cannot be turned around. Sometimes these things just don't happen. But I shifted into my higher self, and I really, tuned into what was my highest aspirations for this collaboration. And I got really clear on myself, and these are some of the methods and tools and practices that we want to share with you. I got really clear about, what was causing this limited self, but also what I wanted to shift into. And I managed to turn this project around by myself completely and change the conversation, change the project, change the outcome completely from that aspect of myself. I had a different collaboration challenge come up with a series of workshops I was booked in to do. And I'm not going to go into details, but it turned out that this partnership was not aligned. It was not aligned for us to work together. And again, I first went in for a moment into my limited self and got really upset and worried about it. But again, use these techniques and, my experience and everything we're going to share with you, and then shift it into my higher self. And for this one, I actually chose to step out of the partnership because I felt that would be in everyone's best interest. So it's not, there's never one solution to always work together, to always fix whatever it, but sometimes it works to really fix it and really work to align things. And sometimes the alignment is to step away, and sometimes it is to not do anything at all. Some people, when I share about this work and I teach and train people say, oh, but what about all my experience? I've spent so many years, I feel really comfortable now. I've been in corporate for so many years, and I have all this experience-based knowledge that, I feel really comfortable with. Can I not use that? And initially I said, of course we can always go back. Our experience that we get from our limited self, like that stores all our experiences and, what's worked before and all of these things. And we can bring that with us. But we need to also have the opportunity to step into our higher self. And I would say that today, with the way the world is going, where what's asked of us individually, and what's really serving us to both thrive and create and make an impact, we really need to shift into our higher self and create and live from here into a much bigger degree than we do today. So that's kind of our invitation for you to dive deeper into this work. And then I will hand it over to you, Dorianne, but just a brief moment for questions, if there are any questions or anything.
Can you stop sharing, and then as I'm switching, if anybody has a question?
Yes.
There we go. No questions? Okay.
Maybe they will come up later.
Here we go. Okay. So Maiken has given a really wonderful overview of the ego self and the limited self, and how it's first of all very important for us to become aware of that ego self, that higher self, the distinction between the ego self and the higher self. So a big part of the work that we will do in the masterclass is, first of all, identifying what are our own triggers and what keeps us in the limited self. And then we will also be moving into exploring development. How do we move ourselves into the higher self, and what are the different ways we can do that? We're going to be using a couple of different frameworks for human development so that we can, again, have a language and a way to talk about our own development and to understand where we are, each of us individually, in terms of these frameworks. So the first framework that we are going to be using is from Suzanne Cook-Reuter's work. It says here leadership maturity framework. It's also an ego development framework. And the assumption, the basis for it is that we do have an ego. It is like a structure within our being, and it develops and matures throughout our lives. It does provide structure and protection, so it's not about getting rid of the ego. In fact, I was at a workshop over the weekend at a retreat, and one of the people was saying, how do I get rid of my ego? It's like, no, you don't want to get rid of it. We want it to mature. We want it to develop and grow so that it's serving rather than repressing the expression of our soul, our spirit, our best selves. And so we'll use this model, which represents different successive levels of a person's ability to consider multiple perspectives and to be able to make meaning in an increasingly complex world. So I'm going to not go into deep detail about this model. We will be doing that during the masterclass. But if you look at the bottom part, you can see there's something called pre-conventional, conventional, post-conventional, and transcendent. And you can see that a very small percentage of the world is at pre-conventional and transcendent. Most of the world is at conventional, 75 to 80%, or post-conventional, which is 15 to 20%. And in the various stages that are at conventional, where most people are, that is where we tend to be more ego-driven. In order to shift to really allowing the higher self to drive our decision-making, our lives, our way of being, we have to move in our development to this post-conventional, to the stages in the post-conventional category. So that is one of the things that we'll be really exploring within ourselves. What does it mean to move from, let's say, being a self-determining, which is a stage 4, to a self-questioning, or 5, to a self-actualizing stage. And to be able to be at self-actualizing, the characteristics of a person who's at that stage really helps to be able to deal with what we're calling this VUCA world, the volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world. So here's another view of the same concepts that comes from Robert Keegan and Lisa Leahy, which kind of is a little bit simpler. And it's a very helpful model in understanding how we deal with complexity and how we make meaning. So their focus was on meaning making. And what they said was that the socialized mind considers ideas and theories of others, yet the socialized mind has obedience to authority. It's important for a person who has that socialized mind to maintain alignment with others and to be able to feel like they're being valued in a social kind of situation, to be able to belong, to feel like they're part of something. They want to follow the rules of society. And the implication might be that they might not challenge what is not working well because they want to just follow the rules, and therefore they're limiting their options. So somebody at a socialized mind level of development is more likely to be operating out of the limited self. Then you move to the self-authoring mind, and a person at this stage of development is looking for ways to mediate conflicting ideas. So they're seeing that there are conflicting ideas, which of course is a more complex world. And instead of backing away and just saying they're going to follow the rules, they become the chair of their own internal board of directors. They have this internal sense of authority, and they're weighing solutions against their values so that they're making decisions based on knowledge, experience, values, and they're creating or authoring their own response to situations. So the benefits of being at that stage of development is the ability to prioritize and to make use of limited time. And then the implications might be that the frame of reference of that person might be incomplete. And then as the world changes, they may not be able to adapt quickly to it. And then moving into the self-transforming mind, person at this stage of development is going to question their own systems of self-perception and meaning making. And they'll be able to stand back and say, what is my worldview? And how am I looking at things? And how does that influence the way I'm making decisions and the way I'm behaving? And so a person at this stage is willing to see the world in terms of shades of gray, and seeing that there are elements of truth in many different perspectives. So one of the things that we'll also be exploring, not only where are we in these areas of development, but in thinking about the people that we are interacting with in our world, whether we're actually leaders in an organization or we're leaders within ourselves, just our interactions with our colleagues, friends, business partners, whatever it is that we're doing in our lives, is to not assume that everyone is operating from the same state of mind and meaning making that we are, and to be able to expand our ability to be able to help others that we are interacting with, working with, collaborating with, so that we can create something together, common ground, and that we're able to communicate and interact in ways that others can comprehend and respond to in a positive way. Why do we want to move ourselves in our human development up to a higher stage or more later stage of development? There have been studies, many studies. This one's an earlier study, but there have been many studies that show that leaders who have a higher level of complexity, so you can see on the bottom here showing people with socialized versus self-authoring, so that's not even moving into the self-transforming stages, but you can see that the further in complexity level of development a person is, the more effective they are. And this was taking a number of different assessments and methods of measuring effectiveness. And these studies have been replicated by other people. So there's actually quite a lot of research out there now that's showing the greater capacity a person has for complexity and meaning making in a complex world, the more effective they are as a leader. Another part of, or another aspect of the work that we want to do in this masterclass is to incorporate a model of spiritual intelligence. And I know many of the people on this call are very familiar with this. It is work that Maiken and I have been doing for the last many years. We're both certified, and I actually am on the faculty to certify coaches in spiritual intelligence. So we're using this model, and I'm going to go into it for very, very briefly. This is the definition that Cindy Wigglesworth has created for this model. It's the ability to behave with wisdom and compassion while maintaining inner and outer peace or equanimity, regardless of the situation. It's a very simple statement, and there's a lot to it. And furthermore, it reflects an increasingly stable connection to something bigger than us that translate into the world of behaviors, habits, and attitudes. So that something bigger than us is, we could call it our higher self, and or our inner wisdom, and that's what we want to help each other be able to develop in this masterclass. This is the model for SQ21, and for those of you who don't had never heard of it or are not familiar with it, there are 21 skills. This model has been developed over a number of years, has been around for, gosh, almost 20 years now. And there's, I guess I'll just quickly say, on the left-hand side, the capacities are self-focused. On the right-hand side, they are other-focused. The upper two quadrants are the inner world of a person, and the lower two quadrants are the outer world of a person. And we can be at different stages of development for each of these 21 skills, and we are going to focus on certain of these skills during the masterclass. So the ones that we are primarily going to focus on will be awareness of the ego self and higher self, to develop the capacity to really discern between ego self and higher self. The awareness of our own worldview and the awareness of the worldviews of others. Again, the filters that affect our way of perceiving the world, which really also affects the complexity of our inner thoughts. So we'll be looking at that. And then keeping our higher self in charge and seeking guidance from our higher self. And then the final one is making compassionate and wise decisions. So coming from a place of, again, from our higher self, being able to make decisions. So we will have activities, exploration in all of these areas, so that each person in the masterclass can deepen their understanding of themselves and how they would want to develop their capacities. As far as the offering that of this masterclass, we are offering a free assessment to be included with an early bird registration, and that's a value of $159. You receive a 20-page report with the results that's personalized for you, with development suggestions, and that might be a really helpful way of being engaged in your own development. It's like a tool that you can use to support your development as we go through this course. But you must register for the masterclass by August 28th, midnight Pacific time, in order to receive the bonus. just very quickly, we also have used this in our work. Maiken and I have used the SQ21 assessment with clients, and we wanted to evaluate feedback from the use of SQ21 as a tool for coaching and for developing leadership development workshops for our clients. And so in this case, this example, majority of people really felt value from this. It brought clarity of their development areas, and it was very interesting, and it opened up for dialogue. So I see that are there some questions? Anything, somebody had to drop off maybe, but are there any questions anybody has at this point of what we would be including? We're going to jump into the actual content of each week very quickly. You have to unmute yourself if you have a question. Okay. Maiken, I'll stop sharing and you can go ahead and share. And then, you have to unmute yourself.
Excellent. I'll just do the, so this masterclass itself is 6 weeks, 3 modules, and we have 2 calls per week, one which is very teaching focused, and then one is very interactive. And the 3 main themes are self-awareness, leadership presence, and moving into action. That's kind of the developmental journey that we are going through. And the first week is really to deepen this aspect of self-awareness and this relationship between the lower self, limited self, and higher self, unlimited self, and begin to use and understand and observe this mindset. And I will say, I think a lot of people here have been on a developmental path, and I know a lot of people that are drawn to this. Even the wording higher self are already, very immersed in this work. But there is always a deeper layer, and we will apply we'll combine the research and the developmental framework and all of these things with some more mystical practices in this, so we can go really deep into recognizing and distinguishing not just our ego, but also the structures of the lower self that are keeping us limited in any way, how it ever shows up for you. And because of that, it's also very important that each of you choose an intention for your development during this masterclass, because that will work as a initiation almost to go deeper into whatever level you're ready to step into or dive into, wherever you are. So we will meet you there. So the first week would really be about deepening that practice and get the terminology and get everyone on the same page so we can start this path together. And then week 2, we'll go deeper into the stage development models and how the challenges and dynamics of each of these stages, how they present themselves. And not just will it give you deepen your own self-awareness, but it will also give you an understanding for everyone else around you, to see and to meet kind of what are the dynamics of these decision-making stages. And we'll go deeper into the social construct of reality, a perception of reality, and how it's all individual, and how we're creating reality, each of ourselves, and how we can get out of our mind of right and wrong and go into and experiencing and observing and creating more in the moment. And we will get more in tune with and get even more clear on and deeper explore how each of our decision-making processes manifest themselves, and dive deeper into our preconditioned mind. Just a really quick example of a leader from a very, very kind of conscious, leadership-focused company who does a lot of internal developmental work and stuff. who discovered that because of something that happened in his childhood, he had always been leaning towards safer options, for instance, without being aware of it, and without being aware that that was a story from what happened in his teens, was still affecting this decision, his decision process. And so he was didn't really have a choice himself to discern whether it was appropriate for each decision to lean more safe or more risk taking in each unique decision, because he had this predetermined filter about always seeking one kind of decision making, judgment call. So we really got to start to go deeper into this and recognize and use intuition, which is the voice of the higher self, and dive deeper into these two aspects of ourselves. I hope that makes sense. I just thought of this story about this leader that I've been interviewing for this, which is really, yeah, that we are, even no matter how deep we kind of go, we can discover some new layers of where we are leaning in our judgment calls and decisions, where our tendencies are and how we can break these. So these are just an example of what we will focus on the first 2 weeks. And then I will hand over to you, Dorianne, to finish off.
Okay. So we begin module 2 at week 3, and the focus of module 2 is having a leadership presence. So we're going to be looking into our multiple intelligences. So this is where physical, emotional, and spiritual intelligence come in, and how we can use empathy and compassion in our relationships. So this is a lot about just how are we relating with people. The worldviews, how do we see others in the world and make meaning? So we're going to, again, examine what are our own filters, what influences our worldview as we are interacting with others. How are we showing up? What are all of these factors, and how do they impact the way we show up, and are there changes that we would like to make in our way of having a presence? And I just want to mention that every week there will be exercises and homework to do in between. We would have a call at the beginning of the week, and then at the end of the week we'll have a group coaching call. And so we'll be sharing, everyone will be sharing questions and results from their exercises and reflections. Week 4 will be really diving further into this discernment and the shift between small self, ego self, and higher self, and what it means to communicate from the true self, and when do we know that we are communicating from our true self. We'll also be exploring how we take responsibility for our emotions, our behaviors, our relationships, our way of being, and then how we empower others so that they can take responsibility, so that they can grow their awareness. What actions can we take to empower others? And then we'll be exploring the process of collaborative decision making and looking into some processes that we can use so that we are, again, expanding our leadership presence through collaboration. Then in week 5, we go into module 3, which is moving into action. So we've done a lot of deep work within ourselves the first 4 weeks. We want to be able to now bring that out as we've expanded our capacities into action, to be able to apply it in our lives. So we will be, again, bringing in some processes that you can use. One of them is a visioning process. And also for each person who's participating to develop your own goals of who do you want to become or need to become, what do you need to let go of in order to be more have a presence of acting from your higher self. And then also to look at decisions that you're making and how can you approach them from that place of higher self. And one of the things that we will invite people to do during the whole 6 weeks is to start a decision journal and to track what decisions have been coming up in my life and how am I approaching them. And then we can reflect back and see, has it changed over the 6 weeks? Or if it hasn't, what could I do differently if I want to change the way I'm making decisions so that I can come from my higher self? And then finally, week 6, we want to bring this all together. We'll bring in another collaborative decision-making process called affinity process. We will talk about competing demands, the both and, the idea of both and thinking, polarities, how are we looking at what seems to be an intractable problem and maybe finding a different way of looking at it. So there's a process, a tool called polarity management that we'll bring in. And then also the whole arena of creativity. What can we do individually and collaboratively in order to really create a container for emergence? So we're going to be exploring that concept of emergence and creativity within a group setting. Oops, I went backwards. Okay, so I think we can pause here for a minute and see if there are questions about the content for the class, the master class. And you can unmute yourself if you have any questions. Okay. Feel free to send us an email if you have any questions, or just let us know. Then I'm going to share again. Hold on a second. Okay. So our intention for this masterclass is to help the people who are participating, and including ourselves, to move towards the next stage of our development as a leader. And when I use the word leader, again, it's not the single definition of leader being somebody who is managing an organization or leading an organization. We have our own internal leader. We are a leader. We can be a leader in any situation, in a group situation where we're collaborating, in a partnership, with our families. So it's a very expanded view of what it means to be a leader. You'll have a deeper insight into who you are and how you want to lead, capacity to flourish in this VUCA world, to be able to integrate the skills that you learned during the program into your day-to-day actions. And if you are involved with an organization, there will be a benefit to that organization because you're able to be more effective to help the organization towards its vision and mission. And of course, these benefits depend on your commitment of time and focus to learning and to participating and engaging in the discussions and the practices and exercises. We do, we have done this work with other groups, and people have really had some ahas. Their eyes have been opened in being able to look at things from different perspectives and really understand what it means to be ego-driven as opposed to operating from a higher self. And for people to even become aware of their own belief systems, to use their intuition more deeply. And so that's some of the work that we would like to be able to do with you. And we're both excited about doing this work. We love working together. I'll just say this, and then Maiken, you can also kind of add to this. We love working together, collaborating, because we both bring our own perspectives and experiences to this work, and at the same time we have a common base of understanding and knowledge of human development and consciousness and spiritual practices that we believe we can bring together to this. Maiken, would you like to say anything to add to that?
Yeah, I had one thing though. It's I really wanted to say, and then it escaped my mind. It might come back, but yeah, I mean, as Dorianne also mentioned, we have like kind of the same kind of theoretical background, you could say. Whereas Dorianne is certified in Suzuki Grider's work, I'm certified in a similar model by Hill, and also in spiritual intelligence and adult developmental coaching. So that kind of framework we both come with, and both have also kind of the mystical spiritual practice that we introduce into this work, and which is also really infusing it to take it to a higher level, I think, you know, as we also grow. And yeah, one thing I wanted to say also is that when we work together, even though me and Dorianne offer and set the framework, I mean, that's really, it's really inviting a co-creative space where things can change. If we, if the group and things emerge, like, we will just, I mean, happy to skip whatever is planned for a week and introduce something else if that is what transpires in the group. I mean, that's how we used to do it. So we offer just like a framework that can be changed and molded and you know, changed into something, altered into something else completely, as long as it fits within the journey we are wanting to take together. But it's also really inviting co-creation in that sense, that we are just here also to hold space and to facilitate and to pass on our experience and knowledge about these things that we have chosen to co-create together, and where we are coming from. And for me personally, I feel it's also coming from the value that this work brings to my own life. And I feel personally that, you know, so much information and so many decisions, so many opportunities out there. So really to be able to discern really, you know, really high outcomes, the highest possible outcomes for ourselves all the time, is what creates this peace and calm and inner stability that spiritual intelligence is also really about. And I think that's where I experienced the most value. And then it's just really rich and engaging to dive into this work as a group and not just do it on your own, because there's always learning to have from each other's perspectives. So we're also really inviting in that group co-creation spirit. And we are putting a lot in here. It's really rich program. So, you know, some will also maybe, you know, be in the Facebook group that we are setting up for this, and other things throughout the week, so we can keep the conversation and deepening the conversation. Yeah. So
these are the logistics. We have set dates for the class to begin, or the MasterClass to begin, on the 9th of September, which is a Monday. So all the first part of each week would happen on a Monday from 7 to 9 p.m. Central European time. And that would be the where we would present most of the material. We would have some questions and answers, and a little bit of discussion and some practices. But then we have a call on a Saturday. Now, I know some of you are in a very different time zone. So depending on who signs up for the MasterClass, who's actually registered, we could adjust the Saturday time, because right now it's 9:30 to 11:30 in the morning on Saturdays Central European time, which I know is kind of the middle of the night for some people. So it is adjustable depending on who registers. And the idea for that second meeting, that second call, is for people to really have dialogue, to get deeper into our own experiences with the material and ask questions and talk about our experiences with the various exercises and practices that we will be engaging in. We'll have the meetings by Zoom, which you are all now participating in. We'll record them. You'll have the recordings available for you up to 2 months after we finish the masterclass. If you can't be on the call, but you have questions or comments, you can send us emails with that. We'll also have this private Facebook page so that we can have a dialogue going throughout the 6 weeks. And then for registration, if you register by August 28th, it's a lower price than if you register after August 28th. And the early bird also includes an SQ21 assessment included in that. And I know many of you have had an assessment before. However, if it's been a couple of years since you last had an SQ21 assessment, you might be interested to have another one. And we're setting a deadline of September 1st for the final registrations, because we want to make sure that we know we have enough people in the master class to move forward. So our minimum participants are 5 and our maximum are 15. We, again, want to keep it, the group small enough so that we can really go deep in our dialogue and exploration. Maiken, do you have anything to add?
No, I don't think so. I think you said it all. Well, maybe just a comment, like one of the reasons why we offered the SQ21, besides me and Dorianne both, being certified in this and using this as a framework, it's also, we thought, a really good opportunity for each individual to kind of bring in some additional just learning and insight into this process of where am I right now, kind of thing, to just kind of check in. There's a really great way to just check in with with oneself and to see, okay, are there any skills that I really want to take this opportunity to focus on and go deeper with. So we thought it would be really appropriate within the framework and the work we are doing to make extra benefit and of the class.
Are there any questions about the anything that we've talked about, of course, and as well as the logistics? Yes, Marcia, you have a question? Can you unmute yourself?
Trying.
Yeah. Okay.
Is there an email? Your email, Dorianne, please, if I can write to you later.
Yes. It would be Dorianne at Collective Virtuosity. Let me put it in the chat.
I know. I visited your site.
Yes.
I have some of your articles there.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I will write it.
Yeah, collectivevirtuosity.com. I'll put it in the chat box as well.
Okay, thank you. It's
Go ahead.
Sorry. I found it very interesting and very important content. And it would be wonderful if I could join, but I'm not sure I will be able to because of the dates. And but I will do my best, and I will try and reach you through the email to see if anything else is possible. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Marcia. Any other comments or questions?
Dorianne, we could maybe stop the recording and just kind of open up the floor for if,
Okay.
unless there is something.
Let me stop the recording.